Most great companies in the world today were actually started by founders who got really curious and asked deep, meaningful questions. Take the example of Airbnb. Brian Chesky asked himself, what is the way to democratize travel accommodation across the world? And this led to a $100 billion startup in less than 15 years. Steve Jobs, the founder of Apple, asked the question, how can everybody own a great personal computer? How can everybody have music in their pockets? How can everybody actually own a great laptop? And this led to the company Apple, which is now at $3 trillion of market cap. Mark Zuckerberg, when starting Facebook, asked the question, how can the world be a more connected place on the internet? And this led to the largest social media platform, which now owns WhatsApp, Facebook, Instagram. Daniel Ek, the founder of Spotify, asked the question, how can music for artists and the audience be democratized for the entire world? And this led to the company that we all know as Spotify, the largest social media for music in the world. This leads us to prove that the best companies start with great questions, great insights, and deep curiosity. And if that's the genesis of great companies, then is it also the genesis of other fields? Yes, very so. Irrespective of whom you want to become in the audience today, you can all ask great questions and excel in your fields. Think about what an investigator does when uncovering a crime. Think about what a lawyer does when arguing a case. Think about what a scientist does when uncovering a discovery. All of them ask great questions. As a venture capital investor myself, I ask questions on a very fundamental level of founders as to why they are building their companies and what is driving them to actually start up, succeed, and really win in the real world. That is the crux of what we all want to do. You as students, most of your times in classes, ask deep, meaningful questions of your professors, and those who do eventually win. Research suggests that people who ask deep questions actually go on to succeed in life. There is also deep proof that if you've asked questions meaningfully at the workplace, you will succeed materially in life. Now, having established that questions are the crux of today's world, I want to share the example of the ChatGPT world we're in. In a world where we are chasing to find the right answers, what differentiates two responses on the same ChatGPT platform is actually different framing of questions. In today's talk, I want to accomplish between you and me the art of asking great questions. 4 years ago, I got curious about how to build a company in India. I tried my hand at it, and I failed tremendously. With very little network, with very little understanding of how to build a tech company, I set out on understanding from founders themselves. This led to my podcast, the podcast I now call Indian Silicon Valley. In the last 4 years, I've had the absolute privilege of actually hosting 250 plus founders across 2,000 plus questions. In all of this dialogue, I have realized that a great question has 3 important elements. 1, it has to be very thought through. 2, it has to be very empathetic. And 3, it needs to derive an insightful response. Now, this sounds very easy, yet it is incredibly difficult in practice. Now, today, I want to share with you a 5-step framework that I have developed that I utilize massively when framing my questions for a guest or when asking founders when investing in them. The first step in that framework is preparation. Preparation is the pre-work that you do in order to uncover insights that are already out there so that you don't have to repeat what you want to know. Now, this is very obvious to some of you in the audience who do your homework well before a class starts. You will realize automatically that when you have done the work, you will be able to meaningfully ask questions to your professor. In my profession, it shows up when I have done deep research about a particular founder. Instead of asking a founder, why did you choose to start your company at this point? I often ask the question, You have done 5 years of management consultancy before this. Was there a particular tipping point during your consultancy days that made you realize that you want to start a company? Can you tell me a bit more about that so that I can understand better from him or her as to why they are starting up? That is the crux of deep preparation. If you do your homework well, you will ask questions that are non-obvious, you will ask questions which are meaningful, and you will derive responses which are core to original thinking. That brings me to my next point, which is depth. Now, most questions are often very surface level, which is absolutely okay, yet they don't uncover original thought. I've had the pleasure of talking to founders such as Sanjeev Bikhchandani, who's the founder of InfoEdge, such as Aman Gupta. These are all public personas who are already out there. Now, if I were to ask them the same questions that somebody else has, I would probably get the same responses, right? However, I have tried to make an attempt to go and peel the layer a deeper way. The onion needs to be peeled in a manner that you can derive something that is original. And thus, you have to ask them questions which make sense from a deeper lens. Now, I was at a coffee with the founder of Spinny, and this was not a recorded podcast, yet I did some weeks of research before I went and met the founder. This is a $3 billion valued company which talks about automobiles which are second-hand in nature. Now, I was able to ask very specific questions, post which I actually invested in a financing company that talks about the very same problem statement. Now, if I weren't very meaningful about this coffee conversation, I would probably not uncover insights that would be meaningful enough for me to invest in the company that I did later on. That's your cue to ask deep, meaningful questions. This also shows up when you sit for placements. In every conversation with an interviewer, you will be left with a conversation at the end where the interviewer will ask you to ask a question to them. Now, in this moment, you could either ask a question like, hey, what is the culture at your company? Or you could ask, I realized in my research that you have done a top-bottom culture at your organization. Can you tell me a bit more about how this top-bottom culture functions and what will be my responsibility with the manager that I am assigned if I get a job at your company? That is a deep question to ask, as opposed to the non-deep question. The third point in my framework is that of embracing stupidity. This is my favorite because this is the most intuitive yet the most difficult to practice. Now, we all naturally want to sound smart, don't we? We all want to ask the meaningful question that sounds fancy, and we all want to keep shut when a question pops in our head which is difficult, which is easy, yet sounds very simple. The truth of the matter is, the great questions are actually very simple. Think when the apple fell on Newton's head. Did he complicate and ask what the injury would be? No. He asked why did the apple fall, and that led to one of the most important discoveries of our time, gravity. And that is supposed to be your cue. So the next time you are in the audience listening to a lecture, thinking about a question that all of you are with your friends, and you worry that the professor will perhaps judge you for asking a simple question or your teammates will actually judge you, please don't. The best questions are asked when you embrace stupidity, when you really acknowledge the childlike curiosity inside of you. That is why the questions by children are the absolute best. They don't know what stupidity means, right? For them, everything is so pure, and thus they are able to ask the questions at their purest version. This brings me to my fourth point, which is that of enabling structure. Now, most questions, if you think, are not in isolation. Very rarely, if you are diving deeper into a subject, you will stop at one question, which means you will need a series of things to follow. Now, in this series, if you are not careful, you will probably miss the point 1 versus the point 3. Now, as I've also prepared for this talk, I have a map in my head. That gives me structure to coordinate and tell you what I want to convey. Now, if I were to start with point 5 first, give you point 2nd next, talk about ChatGPT at the end, and talk about the importance of questions towards in the middle, you would probably lose the plot, right? Now that is where you have to be meaningful in arriving at a map in your head. This is not as difficult as it may sound. It is just to ensure that you have a certain sense of structure in your head when asking your questions. So when you're asking your prospective employer questions, don't start with what the salary is going to be. Start with perhaps something more meaningful. Get to the salary towards the end maybe, and that's absolutely all right too, but have that structure in your mind. The fifth, and my absolute favorite one, is enabling vulnerability. Now, deep questions require original answers and not manufactured ones. What that means is you have to eventually embrace vulnerability and enable it for the other person. Now, that's not as easy as it sounds, and that is actually my superpower. Now, I have been blessed somehow to have conversations where guests have come and told me, "Hey, Jivraj, I felt very comfortable sharing with you what I have usually not shared before." On diving deeper, I realized it is my strength of being my absolute self, and that's the easy part. All of us, instead of putting up a face, can actually be our original selves to talk about what we really want to, as opposed to what will really impress the other person. So the next time you're having a conversation with somebody and you fear judgment and you fear wanting to be an imposter, to be somebody else, please don't. Please be your original, authentic self, and I can assure you that will bring the vulnerable side of the other person deriving original insights from them. Now, this is the 5-step framework. If you are able to crack, I am confident you can crack a really, really good question. To revisit, we had structure, we had preparation, post which we had depth, we had embracing stupidity, we had structure, and we had embracing vulnerability. These are the 5 steps to a great question. Now, most of these questions, by the way, are the ones we ask of others. But you know what the most important questions in life are? The questions that we ask of ourselves. There is this lingering voice almost always inside all of us that asks ourselves questions which are usually fearful. They usually go like, "Hey, will I be able to do this? Hey, am I good enough for this? Hey, should I really pursue this?" Unfortunate as it is, these are the bad questions to ask. These are not good. These are not at all okay. These are absolutely bad. The better questions to ask ourselves are, "Hey, what can I do to make it happen? How lovely would it be if I succeeded at it? What do I need to accomplish in order to get to my goals?" This changes the narrative in such a meaningful manner. And if you are able to ask yourselves, change that inner voice inside of you, and develop this mindset, I think you will automatically ask yourself and the people around you the right questions. In today's world, with ChatGPT, with curiosity, with competition, all of you are fighting for attention. Instead of becoming smarter on what to answer, try to spend time on what to question. Thank you so much. That is how we can ask better questions.